This case did not just stall, and the RCMP did not just repeat old information. In a recent confirmation, investigators acknowledged new details are quietly changing how the disappearance of Lilly and Jack Sullivan is being reconstructed. No arrest. No suspect named. No evidence reveal. But once you understand what was confirmed and why police chose to acknowledge it now, it becomes clear why this case is not being treated as cold. Stay with me, because this shift directly challenges an assumption many people made early on. Let's quickly ground this in what is known and what has been officially confirmed. Lilly and Jack Sullivan, siblings living in a rural part of Pictou County, Nova Scotia, disappeared from their home in early May. The setting itself mattered from the beginning. Rural terrain presents unique challenges, especially when young children are involved, which is why authorities treated the initial response as a time-critical emergency. Massive search efforts were launched almost immediately. Ground teams moved through wooded areas, properties, and surrounding land in expanding grids. Air support was used to cover large sections of terrain quickly, scanning areas that were difficult or dangerous to reach on foot. Specialized resources were deployed, including trained canine units and personnel experienced in missing children searches. Community members and volunteers contributed countless hours under coordinated direction, reflecting both urgency and scale. Despite these efforts, the outcome remained deeply concerning. Weeks passed without a single confirmed sighting of Lilly or Jack after the morning they were reported missing. No remains were recovered. No personal items were definitively linked to a clear direction of travel. And no arrests were announced. The absence of visible progress led to understandable frustration and fear, not just within the local community, but far beyond it. As the months went on, a narrative began to take shape online. Many people assumed the case had gone quiet. Others concluded that nothing new was being learned behind the scenes. Some believed investigators were simply waiting for a tip, a confession, or an accident that might bring answers. That perception was fueled by the lack of frequent public updates, which in many cases are limited by investigative necessity rather than inactivity. But that assumption no longer holds. Recent confirmations from RCMP make it clear that the investigation did not stall, it shifted. Instead of visible searches and daily briefings, the focus moved into reconstruction, analysis, and review. Information continued to come in. Data continued to be examined, and earlier assumptions continued to be questioned. The case did not go quiet, it went deeper. And that change explains why developments now matter more than they may appear on the surface. The RCMP has now confirmed that the investigation into the disappearance of Lilly and Jack Sullivan is information-heavy, not evidence-empty, and that distinction carries real weight. Those words are not casual, and they are not chosen for public comfort. In law enforcement language, describing a case as information-heavy signals that investigators are actively working with a large volume of material that has not yet been fully resolved or conclusively interpreted. When police characterize an investigation this way, they are saying there are still details under review. Tips continue to be examined, re-examined, and compared against one another. Statements given weeks or even months apart are being cross-checked for consistency and placement within a refined timeline. Information that once seemed isolated is now being tested to see how it fits into the broader sequence of events surrounding the disappearance. This process is not about waiting passively. It is about sequencing. Investigators are working to determine not just what information exists, but when it occurred and how it interacts with other known data points. That includes aligning witness accounts with movement analysis, digital timestamps, and verified activity in the area. In complex cases like this, answers rarely come from a single piece of evidence. They emerge when multiple fragments line up in a way that reduces uncertainty. Agencies do not publicly acknowledge this type of investigative posture unless they believe progress is still possible. Law enforcement is careful with language, especially in high-profile cases. Confirming that a case is information-heavy is a signal that resources are still being applied and that investigators believe unresolved questions can still be answered through continued analysis. This confirmation directly shifts how the case is being worked. The focus is no longer on discovering whether information exists, but on determining how existing information connects. That shift suggests the investigation has moved into a more analytical phase, one centered on reconstruction rather than discovery. And that matters because it sets a stage for what comes next. What has already been confirmed is only the first part of what investigators have quietly acknowledged about how this case is now being approached. The second confirmation is more subtle, but in many ways far more telling about where this investigation stands. RCMP acknowledged that earlier assumptions in the disappearance of Lilly and Jack Sullivan are still being actively evaluated rather than treated as fixed conclusions. That alone signals an important reality. Investigators are not locked into a single narrative about what happened, even months after children vanished. This does not mean police are simply retracing old steps or repeating past work. Instead, they are reassessing how the case was originally framed. That includes re-examining timelines, narrowing or expanding movement windows, and testing how individual pieces of information fit together when viewed from a different angle. Early assumptions are often necessary in the first hours of a missing persons case, but as more information is collected, those assumptions must either hold up under scrutiny or be adjusted. When law enforcement continues this level of reassessment months into an investigation, it usually indicates that something does not fully align yet. It suggests there are inconsistencies, gaps, or unanswered questions that prevent investigators from confidently closing off certain possibilities. Rather than forcing the facts to fit an early theory, RCMP appears to be doing the opposite, allowing the information to guide the direction of the case, even if that means revisiting uncomfortable uncertainties. This approach is especially important in a case where physical evidence is limited. Without clear markers like a confirmed crime scene or recovered remains, the timeline becomes one of the most critical tools investigators have. Small shifts in when something happened, or when it could not have happened, can significantly change how the entire case is interpreted, and this helps explain a detail that many people misunderstood as the case went quiet. The lack of public updates did not mean conclusions had been reached. It meant the opposite. It meant investigators were still testing assumptions, still refining sequences, and still trying to resolve what did not yet make sense. That ongoing evaluation indicates the case remains open, active, and unresolved, not stalled, but carefully reworked behind the scenes. Let's be very clear, because in cases like this, misinformation spreads quickly and often fills the gaps left by limited public updates. What RCMP has recently confirmed does not mean that a suspect has been identified. It does not mean an arrest is imminent, and it does not mean that new physical evidence has been recovered and is being withheld from the public. None of those conclusions are supported by official statements, and assuming otherwise only distort what investigators have actually said. The RCMP has not accused anyone in connection with the disappearance of Lilly and Jack Sullivan. They have not named a person of interest, and they have not publicly confirmed that a crime has occurred. Just as importantly, they have not ruled out any possibilities. All scenarios remain under consideration because the available information does not yet allow investigators to confidently eliminate entire lines of inquiry. What RCMP has done is confirm that the case is still being actively reconstructed. That distinction matters. A shelved case is one where leads are exhausted and assumptions are locked in. A reconstructed case is one where information is still being analyzed, reordered, and tested against evolving timelines. Reconstruction means investigators are asking whether early conclusions still hold up and whether overlooked details now carry new significance. This kind of work often happens quietly, without visible action for the public to observe. There are no large search parties, no daily briefings, and no dramatic announcements. But it is still forward motion. It reflects ongoing effort to understand sequence, behavior, and context, especially in a case where answers may depend on alignment rather than discovery that alone is meaningful. It shows the investigation has not stalled and has not been abandoned. Progress does not always arrive with headlines. Sometimes it comes through careful, methodical work that reshapes how a case is understood, even if the results are not immediately visible. Investigations don't quietly shift direction without reason. They do it when information keeps resurfacing a tips point back to unresolved gaps, or timelines don't fully reconcile, and by confirming these new details publicly, the RCMP is sending clear message. This case is still open, still active, and still dependent on information someone out there may have. And that's why, months later, this investigation is not over.